So we are so grateful to Dr. Veena Kalra that she has kindly agreed to speak and be the introducing speaker for the third session that we are starting of AOC and Web Academy for pediatric residents and pediatricians. So with all these words, I would humbly request Professor Veena Kalra ma'am to start her presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaushik, and thank you, Dr. Ranjit Kumar, and thank you all of you for inviting me to start the third session. Opening batsman, usually out for a duck, okay? So there I begin on CNS tuberculosis, a disease of antiquity. I've been asked to speak of what's new. Believe me, what's old is far more meaningful than what's new in CNS tuberculosis. However, the burden of tuberculosis as estimated is anything like 10 to million new cases per year. There's resurgence of TB in the West, also in children and adults infected by HIV. CNS TB, however, is a burden greater in children than in adults. That's why it's something that's in the pediatrician's domain. CNS TB is always a secondary form of tuberculosis, never a primary tuberculosis, and it's always caused by human bacilli, not the all other varieties of tubercle bacilli that we see. So I think these are two very important points when we look at how the disease comes into our body and how it spreads. Out of people who have tuberculosis, a lot of them have extrapulmonary tuberculosis, which happens in almost any and every organ of the body. The brain bears the brunt, and about 5 to 10% of these are borne by the CNS. The wide variety of mimics that it produces causes it to be a great diagnostic challenge. It's a paucibacillary disease, and therefore, frequently we can't satisfy the Koch's postulates in this disease. With the passage of time, we have been able to reduce the mortality due to anti-tubercular drugs. Morbidity, however, is still a problem. Coming then to how does this disease enter the CNS? From the primary infection, it's usually a bacterial infection or a lymphobacterial blood-borne infection, by which it goes into a phase of basilemia. From there it goes and seeds under the subependymal surface or the subpial surface. The subpial surface produces something like what are called the Rix foci, which we can see very clearly. These are the Rix foci. This is the subpial surface, and at the lining of the ventricles and the choroid plexus. These are the usual first places where it comes. From there, okay, 1 minute. From there, what we see is that it needs a Trojan horse to carry it across the blood CSF barrier and enter into the blood-brain, cross the blood-brain barrier to seed into either the brain substance or the arachnoid pial surface. So this Trojan horse is usually a modified macrophage or a T cell or a B cell. All these can function as that. From after it reaches, it seeds into, from the subpial focus, it can discharge bacilli going on to produce a meningitis. Similarly, from the choroid plexus, it can seed to produce a meningitis. It can affect the blood vessels to produce an endovasculitis. It can go on to infect the large vessels through the through any surface, through the outer surface of the major arteries, producing a fibrosis, thereby resulting in something like a very sclerosing vasculitis or an arteritis, resulting in infarcts which can be related to large vessels or through the lenticular striate vessels into the basal ganglia. The involvement of the brain surface involves frequently the activated microglia and thereby resulting in producing brain damage. The cells involved are all the cells that are present, the lymphocytes, the activated polymorphonuclear leukocytes, the B cells, all of them result in involvement of the brain substance, going on to brain edema and infarcts. So therefore, you can have the meninges, you can have the choroid plexus, you can have the major vessels, you can have infarcts, you can involve the choroid plexus, you can have sleeves of inflammation around the cranial nerves. It can affect the spinal cord, similarly all layers of the spinal cord. So therefore, that's the way in which tuberculosis can affect really any part of the CNS. So the pathological correlates include a meningeal exudate, a border zone encephalitis, which can coexist with meningitis. It can lead to obstruction of CSF pathways. It can lead to an absorption defect on the surface of the cortex. The exudates lead to ischemic foci, major arteries, as I mentioned, which is usually the junction of the ICA and the MCA. The small arteries are usually the lenticular striate arteries or small arteries at the surface of the cortex due to the dense exudates. The nerves get involved by nerve engulfment and multiple cranial nerves can be infected, and basically edema is common wherever the infection occurs. The clinical spectrum of neurotuberculosis, the commonest is tubercular meningitis. The others include a tuberculoma, include involvement of the spinal cord in about 1%, which results in myelopathy, compressive and non-compressive, polyneuritis, and a peripheral neuropathy. In addition, it can affect, as I mentioned, the vessels, hydrocephalus, localization syndromes that can mimic a lot of other conditions, fungal, neoplastic, vascular. So it can really mimic any neurological profile. So any neurological profile, you have to consider tuberculosis as a differential. If the presentation is not exactly acute, it's more subacute. Encephalopathy is an entity that has also been described. The spectrum has been beautifully described by the seminal work of Dastoor and Udani, in which it was a clinico-pathological autopsy correlation in various stages of TB and involvement of various parts of the nervous system in tuberculosis. I think that work is unparalleled and we all really need to appreciate and read that work. Coming to tuberculous meningitis, which is the commonest among the presentations, it's really something that you have to have a high index of suspicion if you have to make a diagnosis of TBM early. And the essence is to make the diagnosis early because that's how you prevent mortality and morbidity. The clinical features of this entity are rather vague. It can be a subacute prodrome of an insidious fever, malaise, recent weight loss, headache, meningism, raised intracranial pressure, altered sensorium, variable neurological deficits, stroke, vision involvement, cranial nerve palsies. So really this is the spectrum of the involvement and the various presentations it can come with. Never forget that a family history of tuberculosis is extremely important to elicit, and it's a frequent telltale evidence that it could be tuberculosis. A thorough clinical examination, not only of the CNS, but also to look for nodes, also to look for pulmonary involvement, to look for hepatosplenomegaly and any evidence of miliary involvement. Therefore, look for TB elsewhere if you are to make this diagnosis early. So this could be, has been clinically staged into 3 stages. In stage 1, there are more clinical manifestations of a generalized disorder. Not too many definite neurological symptoms except a mild meningeal irritation. Stage 2, the signs of meningitis, altered sensorium, cranial nerve palsies begin to appear. Stage 3, you get severe involvement with coma, convulsions, paralysis, and this is a stage that we would always like to have a diagnosis before this. Rashmi and others from Lucknow have worked on a very important practical clinical diagnostic rule for TBM, and they identified 5 features which are independently predictive of TBM in a significant range. So if at least one feature is present, the sensitivity is 98.4%. But what's important is that as the number of features increase, the specificity of suspicion and diagnosis of tuberculosis becomes better. So therefore, we must be aware that we must look for each of these 5 signs to make a specific diagnosis. The same work was done by Guy Thwartz, which also indicated more or less a similar indication. So therefore, remember that whenever you get a prodrome of more than 7 days, you get visual involvement in terms of optic atrophy, you get focal deficits, you get abnormal movements, and you get a CSF which shows less polymorphonuclear leukocytes than lymphocytes. Suspect TBM. What does the first important clinical investigation when you are suspecting TBM is to look for elevated pressure, pleocytosis, and the number of cells can be highly variable. The usual figure quoted is 100 to 500, but almost 1/3 transgress this range. Predominance of lymphocytes is important. Hypoglycorrhea with reduced sugar, but not as reduced as happens in a pyogenic meningitis. Protein is elevated and the level can be highly variable. Adenosine deaminase has been quoted as a test that's helpful, but is not specific at all. The culture rate depends on the amount of CSF you take and the diligence with which you try and look for the bacteria. But the best culture rates are 0 to 20%. Really not satisfactory even in the best of hands. ADA neurotuberculosis, the range that's considered significant was more than 6 units per liter, but it has too many confounders, and therefore it's not a test that's really looked at with great diagnostic acumen. Coming then to the newer tests, which are truly not so new now, but what's new is that the technology is the same, but our elicitation of targeting the antigens has changed over time. ELISA antibody response in the cerebrospinal fluid to a LAM antigen, which is a cell-based antigen test, has been used, and this is the best of the ELISA tests, but not specific enough. Coming to culturing of the bacteria, on the solid LJ medium, the culture rate I mentioned was 0 to 20%. We can use the liquid cultures which give a higher yield. This includes the BACTEC and the microbacterial growth index tube, which is a good test and increases this sensitivity to about 35 to 45%. A recent test is a gamma interferon release assay test, which is called the IGRA. This is a good advance. It is more specific. It is again ELISA based. As I mentioned that on the same technology, you begin to use newer antigens for testing. You begin to use newer antibodies for testing. This is based on T cell stimulation products. After stimulation with antigen, the antigens we are looking for are the ESET and CFP10. This has greater sensitivity and specificity than any of the other tests that we have been used previously, like the PCR or the ELISA-based test. However, its disadvantage is that it doesn't distinguish active TB from latent tuberculosis. However, it's a good test that would be applicable in low-income countries with a high TB burden. Coming then to the more WHO proposed test called the GeneXpert MTB, which has the advantage of testing rifampicin resistance or sensitivity, a very quick response in 2 hours time. So this is one of the good tests. However, one must know that in definite TBM, the expert test was positive in 100%, but we are dealing with definite TBM. The problem of diagnosis is not so much of the definite TBM, but of the suspected TBM. In this, the GeneXpert test has a specificity of 99.5%, but a sensitivity of only 38.2%, variable up to 59.3% in different series. So therefore, it's not a great support in suspected TBM. Therefore, if you get a positive GeneXpert test, it confirms tuberculous meningitis. A negative test does not rule out TBM. However, the advantage is the rifampicin resistance, which it identifies quickly. The other supportive tests commonly used in clinical practice, tuberculin 18.9 to 81%. A negative Bantu has greater mortality, indicating lack of immunity. Chest X-ray abnormal in about 50%. Family screen positive in 15 to 20%. The boon for diagnosis has come up with neuroimaging and the newer techniques that are available with the neuroimaging. So with the MRI, we can identify hydrocephalus. We can identify conglomerate tuberculomas. We can identify meningeal exudates. This is an interesting one. It's a conglomerate tuberculoma. Normally, TBM is associated with communicating hydrocephalus. But remember, when you have tuberculomas or you have a focal lesion that's pressing on the third ventricle outlet, you can get an obstructive hydrocephalus. And this is an urgent indication for intervention and surgery. The other less common rare indication that you see with tuberculosis is a tuberculous abscess, which is identified as a thick-walled cavity, mostly in the cerebellum. And it's important to see that the contents of this have a variegated appearance. You see here, this. And this is something that distinguishes a tubercular abscess in addition to its size and thick-walled nature. Vasculitis, as I mentioned earlier, can affect the major vessels or it can affect the lenticulostriate vessels. So this is what we see. We see the lenticulostriate vessels producing a change. You can compare this with this side and you find a significant involvement. Right? And basal, the hallmark of tuberculous meningitis as identified on the imaging is the basal exudates. Dense basal exudates really don't occur with a viral meningitis, really don't occur with pyogenic meningitis. You can get exudates with pyogenic meningitis. They are usually more on the cortex. A thick basal exudate is rather characteristic. Then coming to tuberculous encephalopathy, which has been described by Udani and Dastoor in Indian children, it was an autopsy diagnosis. The characteristic features of this entity are the development of acute white matter edema and death of neurons. So therefore, it's a condition that comes rather acutely with convulsions, stupor, coma, without signs of meningeal irritation, without focal neurological deficits. And this is a rare condition, but is seen in tuberculosis. Therefore, I would sum up to say that neuroimaging is the boon for diagnosis. It should be contrast enhanced. MRS can help because it identifies lipid peaks, especially in a tuberculoma. Hydrocephalus is seen in up to 20%, mostly communicating. Infarcts in about 50%. Basal meningitis in 75%. Tuberculomas in 10%. They may be single, they may be multiple. Small tuberculomas are usually in the posterior fossa. Large tuberculomas, single, can occur anywhere. They could occur at the onset or they could occur during the course of treatment. Vasculitis, cranial nerve inflammation, border zone encephalitis, optochiasmatic arachnoiditis, giving rise to visual involvement. Compressive, non-compressive myelopathy, and lipid peaks on an MRS. Coming then to treatment of tuberculous meningitis, which is the commonest entity. Supportive therapy, take care of temperature, manage intracranial pressure, treat seizures with drugs that don't interact with anti-tubercular drugs and also don't produce hepatotoxicity. Phenytoin, levetiracetam may be good choices, and add pyridoxine. It helps to reduce the incidence of seizures. Vision and fundus should be checked frequently. You could get both papilledema and optic atrophy. Cerebral salt wasting is common. Treat with sodium rich fluids if hypovolemic. Restrict fluids if euvolemic. Nutrition, general care is important because a lot of these children are already undernourished and have become undernourished in the course of this subacute disease. Monitor for complications like changes in sensorium, raised intracranial pressure, evidences of herniation, hydrocephalus, vision, and fundus. And if complications produce an acute deterioration, it may be an indication to re-image, because many a times you would find either an infarct, or you would find granulomas that have appeared, or you would find an acute complication that has happened. Coming then to treatment, the intensive phase consists of 4 drugs, conventional. Continuation phase, at least 7 months. I'll come to the duration part later. The first 2 months are with HRZE. The next 7 months, ideally 10 months, because the studies indicate that 9 months may be inadequate and there may be higher relapses. So therefore, the changes are that the total duration should be at least 12 months. Continuation of ethambutol and pyrazinamide in the continuation phase may be required in some patients. So this is not as sacrosanct that this is HRE only. You may require addition of pyrazinamide, especially if there are tuberculomas that are rampant. In vision impairment, we should avoid use of ethambutol and use streptomycin in these conditions. Follow-up is important. Clinical resolution may occur early, but you need to follow them up for the neuromorbidities, at least for 2 years, as seizures are extremely common. Coming then to the correlation between the 9 months therapy, 6 months therapy, and 1 year therapy. The Philippines Children Medical Center did a study on short course therapy for tuberculosis, neurotuberculosis. The acute response was adequate, but the recurrence risk was higher. And therefore, subsequently, it has been recommended to have a 12-month course of anti-tubercular. Were associated with fewer deaths. They reduced severe residual disability, but in mild to moderate disabilities, the results were inconclusive. Therefore, steroids are important as they reduce death and probably reduce severe disability. This is as far as TBM is concerned. In tuberculoma, steroids are useful because the edema associated with tuberculoma is frequently helped and symptomatically the patient is better. In arachnoiditis, again, steroids are extremely useful and very often we use high-dose steroids. This helps to save the spine. In encephalopathy, steroids are useful. In immunocompromised children, the risk versus benefit are not very clearly demarcated, so we have to use them with caution. In stroke, the outcome is unaltered by use of steroids. This is one indication where steroids don't really produce a major difference. Coming then to the newer trials of corticosteroids in neurotuberculosis, which are playing around with dose and schedule because there's no good trials to say that how long, how much is adequate, and which are the situations in which you need high dose versus low dose. So these are some of the trials that are ongoing. Prednisolone of up to 4 mg per kg for 2 weeks, contrary to the usual 2 mg per kg that has been used conventionally. Taper over 2 weeks. Dexamethasone, the conventional thing is 0.6 to 1 mg per kg. There are trials now with 1 to 6 mg per kg for 1 week and then reduce subsequently over 6 weeks. And this is particularly has been used for spinal tuberculosis. The IV route can be changed to oral in about 1 to 2 weeks, usually by the time the patient is ready for discharge. Coming to what is new or what is required, there are no comparative trials in this, and therefore I think we need to do trials to try out the different doses, different routes, and different brands of corticosteroids to see how they fare with improving the outcome of tuberculosis. In MDR tuberculosis, we have to get back to other drugs, and there must be more than one that must be added every time. Streptomycin, ethionamide, which rapidly penetrates the CSF, fluoroquinolins, cycloserine, kanamycin, amikacin, capreomycin, and rifabutin, particularly important when TB is associated with HIV. Coming to the role of surgery in CNS tuberculosis, there are 3 very special indications: hydrocephalus, and we underuse surgery for hydrocephalus. And I think this is something that I want to drive this message home. We really underuse surgery for hydrocephalus. In spinal tuberculosis, surgery may be required for the bone that's surrounding the tubercular, giving rise to gibbous and cold abscess, or even in tuberculomas. In tubercular abscesses, again, when they don't respond within a week, the size is unaltered. It's important to debulk the abscess so that the response to anti-tubercular drugs improves. Coming to the point of hydrocephalus and BP shunt, hydrocephalus, as I mentioned, is usually communicating. Shunt is indicated to save life and to save vision. If the Glasgow Coma scale is more below 18, in all of them, we need to do a shunt. There's generally raised pressure and we need to do a shunt. The only caveat that comes in, if the CSF protein is high, then we have to maybe at times limit ourselves to doing an Ommaya reservoir. And we then have to wait for proteins to come down, cells to come down. Therefore, if protein and cells are not grossly elevated, an early shunt is indicated. All obstructive hydrocephalus, we must do a shunt, as I showed you one picture. They observe the effect of, in Glasgow Coma Scale, almost 15, which means the child is not severely affected sensorially and the child is in good condition. Even here, if the response, clinical response to other symptoms is not good enough within 1 week or maybe 2 weeks with ATT and steroids, and the ventricle size remains large, this is classically speaking of a stage 1 TBM. A shunt is indicated. Here, the outcome is significantly better if a patient has not been shunted. But believe me, at the AIIMS, we used to try immensely with the pediatric surgeons and the neurosurgeons. But I guess they had higher priorities and we could never get them to do early shunt. And I think this is something that we must all try in future. Prognosis of a TBM, overall mortality 23%, bad risk factors, and morbidity. This is really the bane. And early shunt, good treatment, steroids help to reduce morbidity. Coming then to other forms of CNS tuberculosis, tuberculomas may be single, may be multiple, usually larger than neurocysticerci. They are generally thick-walled, have significant perifocal edema, no scolex, produce significant midline shift, can be in any location. They may be intracerebral, they may be spinal, they may be associated along with HIV, and they may happen once the patient has been treated, and they may come during the course of therapy for patient with TBM after 1 to 4 months within treatment. Worsening of clinical symptoms, appearance of fresh symptoms is an indication to look for a tuberculoma, which can be diagnosed on imaging. Spinal tuberculosis occurs in about 1% of the patients with extra pulmonary tuberculosis. May come as a paraspinal mass, a cold abscess, may come as a bony compression with gibbous, or as a pure myelopathy. May come as tuberculomas in the spine. Tuberculomas may happen in the extradural space, which is the commonest form of a tuberculoma, 64%, maybe arachnoid tuberculomas, 20%. Intramedullary tuberculomas are the least frequent. The other forms of spinal TB include myelitis and arachnoiditis, which is really an adhesive form of arachnoiditis, which gives rise to Freund's syndrome and gives rise to severe neurological sequelae. All the spinal tuberculosis is usually seen more often in older children than children with tuberculous meningitis. Complications of CNS tuberculosis, as I mentioned, hydrocephalus. Consider early VP shunt for all stages of raised intracranial pressure, not responding to ATT or steroids within 1, maximum 2 weeks. The proteins are grossly elevated, the cells are very large. Their external ventricular drainage may have to be resorted to in some situations. Optochiasmatic arachnoiditis, steroids using high-dose dexamethasone, IV prednisolone, oral thalidomide may be used for cases not responding to dexamethasone. Seizures, as I mentioned, that we have to use drugs that produce less hepatotoxicity and may be used levetiracetam and phenytoin. Coming now to what are the newer avenues in tuberculous meningitis or CNS tuberculosis. I think what's not new, but what should never be missed and is frequently missed is that a mother who has harboring tuberculosis, the infant contact is not protected by not giving him chemoprophylaxis. And that is one of the things for which we can't pardon ourselves. Role of neomolecular tests like the expert MTB test on CSF is important. There are new biomarkers that have been generated based on the cellular involvement in TB. So these are some of the tests that have been used for prognostication. Increased levels of these biomarkers are associated with poor prognosis. The other thing where we need to research on is studies on CSF, drug concentration and outcome. We know that there are drugs that have good penetration. For instance, INH reaches 30 times its MIC. Pyrazinamide also has enough CSF concentration. Rifampicin, in the usual doses that we use, may not have adequate CSF concentration, and that is why increased doses of rifampicin per kg is one thing that is being tried. Then randomized controlled trials on dose, drug, and duration regimens are still required. Dose particularly because we frequently need to increase doses of rifampicin because of its inadequate penetration. Then coming to adjunctive therapies, thalidomide that's used in particularly tuberculomas and some other specific therapies. Host-directed therapies that are increasingly under investigation are the use of pentoxifylline, sorry for the bad spellings, etanercept, etc. The other new thing is the viral vectored vaccines for tuberculosis, which are under trial, and they need to be brought into especially countries which bear a high TB burden. PET-CT imaging, not only for the brain, but the diagnosis of lymph nodes elsewhere in the body is frequently a very good indication, and this is rated as a good test where we fail to identify tuberculosis as a cause of a neurological disorder. Then there is this recent concept about transcriptome studies. Transcriptomes include studying the outcomes of various cellular markers, whether it be neutrophils, B cells, macrophages, monocytes, granulocytes. So transcriptome studies have been done on ventricular and lumbar CSF. What was found out was that the lumbar and the ventricular CSF identified a totally different mechanism of injury that's happening. And this is a very new research finding. On the lumbar CSF, what one found is that it was largely a neutrophilic transcriptome. On the ventricular CSF, a lot of it indicated that the B cells, monocytes, macrophages, and other granulocyte stimulation factors were revealed. Therefore, what does it tell us? It tells us that the cerebrum suffers a different mechanism of injury than the spine and the lumbar CSF. Therefore, these are two distinct compartments that are present as far as tuberculosis of the CNS is concerned. This is a very, very new, interesting finding. And the cerebrum suffers a lot of injury due to neurotransmitter profile, glutamate excitotoxicity, and nitric oxide stimulation. And therefore, there's a greater brunt borne by the cerebrum compared to the spinal cord. This has opened up new avenues of therapy, and these include host-directed therapies in which anti-TNF inhibitors, pentoxifylline is under trial, adalimumab and etanercept these are some of the ones that I mentioned earlier. And these are based on identification of the transcriptome studies and the host-directed therapies considering the mechanism of CNS damage. As I said, in stroke, steroids don't benefit, so there are trials that are needed as to the role of aspirin in stroke and how long it needs to be given. So therefore, this brings me to 40 minutes and to end of my talk. Thank you very much for your kind listening. And now we look forward to the moderator taking over and the chairperson taking over to carry on the rest of the proceeds of this seminar. Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you.
Rika.
Thank you very much for opening this webinar series. This is the third one, and it's wonderful to have the founder member, the one who formed the Association of Child Urology, opening this very important talk. You have dealt with it beautifully. You made it a very nice amalgamation of the old and the new. So I will request Dr. Kaushik to take proceedings on from here.
Thank you.
Are you there?
Yeah.
It's really a wonderful talk, ma'am. It was very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Kalra. Thank you, Dr. Rekha, to thank Professor Kalra. Now it is time for the quiz to start. This quiz is meant for pediatric residents and pediatricians, and the purpose for which we started this quiz is to ensure that the students read before the lecture. So, and they listen to the lecture very carefully so that they're able to answer the quiz. This is where ma'am has leaked a lot of answers if you had properly listened to the talk. So we wanted to encourage students to participate in the quiz. So this is the purpose with which we have started. Now with this, I would hand over to Dr. Ranjit and Dr. Ram. They are pediatric neurologist and pediatric senior resident from SRMC Chennai. So Ranjit is the quiz master who will first share the quiz instructions. Dr. Ram will post how the chat is going to proceed. Over to you, Ranjit.
Yeah, can you see my screen, sir?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Ranjit.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful session.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this quiz, I will just give you the instructions to the participants. You need to open. Just one second. Yeah. You need to open Kahoot either in your mobile app or laptop or computer. Create unique nickname for you. The character limit for the nickname is 15. 15 is the maximum characters you can use. So we want to identify the winners. So you have a specific and unique name for you. You can use your first name followed by date of birth, the dates and the month. For example, for myself, I have given like Ranjit 2612. So you can use something like that. I request pediatric neurologists not to participate, but if any qualified or trainee pediatric neurologists want to participate out of interest, you can put your nickname as Neuro, your date, month and year of birth. For example, Neuro 2010-1981. And of course, you won't be getting a prize. So this is to encourage our pediatric PGs and pediatric residents. So the most important thing is it is a self-paced challenge. That means the quiz master will start the quiz and you have to move on, click on the icons from one question to another question. So you have the control once the quiz starts. The faster you answer, higher you score. That's the most important part. If you keep on delaying responses for each question, even though you answer right, your scores may not be high. So a person who answers 19 questions out of 20, but very slow, may not get a higher score than a person who got 15 out of 20, but he answered very fast. So you need to answer more questions correctly and you need to answer questions faster. Each question is time bound. The countdown will be indicated in the question itself. Winners will be announced at the end of the quiz. Of course, quiz master's decision will be final. So I hope the instructions are clear. So now, sir, are you there? Kaushik sir? Yeah.
Yes. So a link has been posted by Dr. Ram in the chat box. So please tap the link and join the Kahoot. Just in case you are not able to locate the link. The pin to the Kahoot for this activity is 0107034. I am repeating, the pin is 0107034.
Or you can even click on the link to go to the quiz directly.
You can directly click on the link to go to the quiz, or you type this pin, log in into either your website or through your mobile app, anything that is comfortable to you. The quiz is already on, so the time has started.
So I request Dr. Ram to share the live of the quiz on the screen. Ram.
So kindly participate in the quiz. Please click on the link.
Ram, are you there?
If you face any problem, please type in the chat. Hope all of you can see the link and click on that link.
Sir, can you unmute Ram?
So hope all of you have started answering the questions. Those who are not able to use the link, please write kahoot.it in your web browser and type the pin 0107034. If you are unable to use the link, please either go to kahoot.it in your web browser and type the pin 0107034.
Hey, Ram, can you tell us like how many have completed or what is the status?
Ram, we can't hear you. You need to speak.
He says unable to take off mute. Okay, can you just give us the status of the quiz in the chat box? Like what?
I'm
Yeah.
I'm repeating the pin for those who have just joined. It is 0107034.
Okay. So Dr. Ram says 150 participants are there in the quiz,
Great. That's a wonderful thing.
but he is unable to take off mute himself. That's fine. Yeah.
But he is unmuted.
Yeah. Now there are 177 participants.
So great, great. So even pediatric neurologist can join with the logo of neuro and then date of birth so that we ensure we don't give you prize even if you're the winner.
Has anybody completed? Ram? Yeah. So now Rocky 2011.
Oh, great,
Rocky.
great.
So we have asked PD if he is a pediatric neurologist, don't write your name and put neuro. Student reading Rocky 2011.
Excellent, excellent. So it's a wonderful thing to see 177 participants coming. I'm sure it's interesting link to go.
Currently, second place is N80. He's leading.
Very good.
Oh,
It's okay, it's okay.
yeah.
Thank you for acknowledging that you're
Yeah.
you're a
That's
neurologist.
so true of you that you have revealed yourself. Fine. So that's Sonali Singh. She has completed, but you won't be getting prize. I think she was the first. Dr. Raj Kulkarni, are you a student? Are you a trained or qualified pediatric neurologist? I'm a faculty at BJMC Pune, so that will be disqualified, sir, right? Like for prize, yeah.
So please spread the news to your postgraduates, encourage them to read the lecture. Thank you, sir.
So we have just 28 more to finish.
It's wonderful to see that, Ranjit.
Yeah, fine. So I think few of you can give a feedback also in the chat box about the quiz. Like
I'm sure they're all tensed right now.
those who have
They won't-
completed. Those who have completed.
For somebody who has not been able to find the quiz, please write kahoot.it and then type the pin kahoot.it and type the pin 0107034. Kahoot.it and then type the pin 0107034. Don't worry, sir. All the talks will be uploaded in the website of AOCN.
Sir, Dr. Rohit Bhaumik says awesome lecture and quiz.
20 more to complete. That's good. That's good. So we are almost near the end of the quiz. So good to know that all of you were engaged in the quiz. It's great to know that.
So, sir, once everybody completes, shall I go to the answers and then we'll announce the results?
We can answer in the last end. We will first answer the doubts which
Okay.
are there in the question and answer.
Fine.
You need to complete the quiz.
Fine. So I will stop share after this, or shall it continue with?
Yes, you can stop sharing. Ma'am, can you unmute yourself? We can't hear you, ma'am. Can you unmute yourself? I am unable to unmute.
Here I am unmuted.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So, ma'am, can we start with the questions?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. There are some interesting questions which many of the students have asked. In Montu, how many TU do you use for tubercular meningitis? TU units. Yeah.
Ideally, should be 2 TU.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. In TBM, what is the most common finding on the neuroimaging that you see in your practice?
Hydrocephalus and basal exudates. These two are between 80, 85, 70%. These are the two most common.
Oh, great. One of them had asked, why not valproate or carbamazepine for seizures in a child with TBM?
Okay. Valproate is a known hepatotoxic agent, and so are the anti-TB drugs like INH, pyrazinamide. So you don't want to add 2 hepatotoxic drugs when you have other choices.
Yes, ma'am. How does pyridoxine actually decrease seizures in TBM?
Pyridoxine is known to have some anti-seizure effect very vaguely in a lot of situations. When you are using INH, along with INH, if you have pyridoxine, the toxicity of INH reduces. And that's one reason why they say that it could be either the pyridoxine effect per se or its interaction with INH that may help.
Thank you, ma'am. In a child with visual impairment, we give HRZS in the intensive phase, avoiding the ethambutol. How do we get about in the continuation phase? Do we give HR for 10 months? Is that fine enough?
No. Point is that ethambutol, we have to see whether there could be an optic atrophy in the beginning. Then it's not ethambutol induced. There could be a visual loss that has come up and it's not associated with optic atrophy. That is more likely to be drug related. In that case, we would like to take off ethambutol and we can use pyrazinamide in that case for some time. But other than that, we can use only 2 drugs in the continuation phase. That also has been tried out in many regimes, that we just use INH and rifampicin in continuation phase if ethambutol is contraindicated. Streptomycin can be used in the acute phase, but in continuation phase should never be used because of the hearing complications that it produces.
Yes, ma'am. Can aspirin be used in TBM to prevent a stroke?
Aspirin has never been documented in TB. This is one of the trials that has never been done, but we know that here the methodology of mechanism is different from the usual stroke. Here it's inflammation, here it's exudate, here it's involvement of the vasa vasorum of the major vessels, which produces almost a strangulation. Aspirin is more effective when you have either the endothelium of the arteries or you have per se a platelet response which you are trying to reduce. So therefore, I don't think it's going to help in prevention. But once you get a stroke, then you do want to make the blood thinner, and that's why it could be used. There are no trials that have been used to say that stroke incidence is reduced if you use it along with ATT.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Mohammad Shakawat from Dhaka is trying to ask, what is the radiological difference between pyogenic and tubercular brain abscess?
Okay. Now, pyogenic abscesses are usually, they don't have a smooth outline. They are very recent abscesses. They have not formed a thick-walled lining. This is the most important difference between a pyogenic and a tubercular abscess. A pyogenic abscess is frequently wavy, not very thick-walled. The contents of a pyogenic abscess have almost a uniform density, whereas the content of a tubercular abscess is very variegated and the wall is very thick. Edema is more with a pyogenic abscess than with a tubercular abscess.
Okay. Ma'am, another interesting question is that in clinical practice for microbiological diagnosis of tubercular meningitis, is it enough to send ZN staining, gene expert and MGIT? Is it sufficient with that, or do you want to suggest anything further?
See, what they say now are that the liquid cultures, which is the MGIT, has an added advantage, but none of them are sufficiently specific in suspected TBM. That's the point.
Yes, ma'am. Why do tuberculomas tend to appear after 1 to 4 months of starting therapy?
Okay. Now, tuberculomas really come with an immune response, and the immune response comes when you treat a disease. Some bacilli are, you kill the bacilli, the products of bacillary death get into the bloodstream and they produce an immune response. And we know that the tubercle bacilli death could be anywhere between 1 to 4 months after start of anti-tubercular therapy. And that is why the latent period between start of therapy and appearance of a tuberculoma.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. What is the difference? One of them had asked, what is the difference, pathological difference between tuberculoma and tubercular abscess?
Okay, now tuberculoma is a solid structure, relatively solid structure. In a tubercular abscess, there is caseation that has begun already inside, and that caseation is of varying degree and varying time gap, and that is what makes it different. Tuberculoma usually has a uniform internal intensity, whereas tubercular abscess has a variable intensity. Second is that a tuberculoma usually has a thick wall, but the wall of a tubercular abscess is far thicker than the wall of a tuberculoma.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Another interesting question is that if a child under 5 years of age has a contact with sputum positive mother and has no active tuberculosis and has been started on prophylaxis, should BCG be given if not vaccinated at birth?
Yes, there's no harm in giving BCG vaccine. It's not going to interfere. It's only going to, we know that children who have BCG vaccine, of course, the take-up of the BCG vaccine is going to be influenced by the therapy, that you must know. Because you're simultaneously giving INH, the take of the vaccine is going to be definitely lower. But we know that BCG per se reduces the severity of TBM and reduces the occurrence of TBM in a child if he happens to have tuberculosis. So therefore, even with INH, we know that the take rate of the conversion rate or the take rate will reduce, but there is no contraindication to giving it simultaneously.
Yes, ma'am. What is the mechanism of thalidomide? I think thalidomide is of a great interest in TBM.
The thalidomide is based on the cellular response, which goes on to produce, if you saw the transcriptome studies, these have recently explained the role of thalidomide because it reduces the nitric oxide damage and also the cell-mediated immune damage in a tuberculoma.
Ma'am, what is the maximum dose of prednisolone that you tend to use for TBM?
See, normally the usual dose is 2 mg per kg. But what they recommend now is that for a short period, 4 mg per kg of prednisolone may be used, especially if there's edema, especially if there's raised pressure. Similarly, with dexamethasone, up to 6 mg per kg, if you realize, it's a huge, big dose. And this can be used only for the first 1 or 2 weeks. Following that, we come to the usual dose, which is 0.16 to 0.6 mg per kg of dexamethasone.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there any difference between IV rifampicin? Is there any difference in the mortality by giving IV rifampicin and oral rifampicin?
I'm not quite sure.
I
I haven't seen a
I got
study to that effect.
correct. There is another Dr. Rajeshwar Dayal from Agra had congratulated you for an excellent
Hi
presentation.
Rajeshwar, how are you?
I'm sure he will be delighted to know that you can recollect him.
Of course, Rajeshwar ko main kaise nahi karungi.
Great. So he has a short question. How long would the shunt have to be in place in a child with TBM? How long do you want to keep the shunt
See,
in?
a shunt is a shunt once it's placed and our purpose is solved. None of us will dare to remove that shunt unless you get a complication in a shunt. Because even when the shunt appears to be doing nothing, we don't know whether a small amount of CSF is leaking through and it's benefiting the child. But the moment this shunt gets into trouble, you get infection, you get a shunt that's not draining well, then you remove. But otherwise, ideally, most surgeons don't remove shunts, but in TB is one exception, especially if we've done it in stage 1, where it may be a good idea to remove this after about 6 months at the end of the acute phase of treatment. But this is only for stage 1. In the other stages, I don't think a surgeon will remove a TB shunt.
If the child is already, this is I think a repeat question, if a child is already on continuation phase of ATT for TBM and have come back with a new onset of tuberculoma, so what do you do?
The new onset tuberculoma always merits, one is steroids for sure, okay? The question as to whether we should enhance anti-TB drugs to MDR-TB or not is not clear. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, I would first add steroids, watch it for about 4 to 6 weeks. If the symptoms worsen or if the tuberculoma does not improve, then I would add MD-TB drugs. But otherwise, all tuberculomas don't merit increase of anti-TB regimen.
Yes, there is one common question from 2 people regarding long-term seizure outcome after treatment with TBM, and how long do you want to give anti-epileptic medications?
Okay. Now, seizures in any meningitis have 2 phases in which they come. One is in the acute phase of meningitis, where we know that it could be the brain edema, it could be lots of local acute factors. But when seizures come on after an infarct, for example, if seizures are associated with a hemiparesis, we know these seizures have to be treated with anticonvulsant drugs for long, because here it's not just the acute phase, it's also the brain involvement and the pattern of brain involvement that is going to predispose them to seizures. And in this category, you need to give them for long, at least 3 years seizure free.
Okay. Another very common problem that we tend to face, if the vision impairment is secondary to the disease itself, should we stop ethambutol?
If there is already an optic atrophy, then we know that this is part of the disease. If there was no optic atrophy and the vision was good in the beginning and it deteriorates after giving ethambutol, then there's certainly an indication to stop ethambutol.
Yes, ma'am. Do you give in the continuation phase HRE alone, or do you add pyrazinamide with it?
There are some studies recently, if you saw the slide carefully, I mentioned that there are some changes, some trials that are going on, that in continuation phase, especially if there are tuberculomas, to continue pyrazinamide, because we know pyrazinamide acts on the intracellular bacilli, and it may be an advantage in some situations.
Another common problem that we tend to face is that how long do we wait for resolution of tuberculomas on neuroimaging?
The resolution time of a tuberculoma may vary from a month to 6 months to a couple of years also. If the tuberculoma has become asymptomatic and it's just lying there, it's not an indication to continue. We know that sometimes these granulomas take very long to disappear. So if we've given about 6 months of treatment, there are no new neurological signs, there's no edema, the lesion on imaging is only showing signs of shrinking, we could stop the addition that we have made at that point in time.
Okay. Last few questions, ma'am. What Dr. Krishna Mohan Podar has asked, what are the CSF biomarkers that predict for worsening of the prognosis?
The CSF biomarkers have again emerged out of the transcriptome studies, and which are the cell markers, the gamma interferon release, then other neutrophilic factors, B cell factors, granulocyte factors. These are the ones that are emerging as biomarkers.
Okay. Ma'am, Dr. Iraj Khan has asked that in a case of tubercular meningitis with communicating hydrocephalus, how long do you want to give glycerol and diamorph?
Glycerol is generally not given for very long, nor Diamox, because first of all, the efficacy of steroids is more than that. Acute phase, maybe you can give mannitol for about 2, 3, 4 days. Then steroids generally take over. After your discharge, if it has failed to help, then only glycerol comes in as an additional role. But remember, if edema is so much, then shunt is the answer. Then these drugs are not the answer.
Okay, fine. Ma'am, the last question from Dr. Rakesh Bhatia from Agra, who has again congratulated you for your excellent presentation as to what is the prognosis of tubercular optic neuritis.
Tubercular optic neuritis, one is a tubercular optic neuritis that happens due to exudates around the optic nerve. Sometimes it can happen with an optic glioma. This category responds very well to high dose steroids and thalidomide. If there is optic atrophy that has set in due to exudates, then of course the outcome is bleak.
Okay. The last question from Dhaka, duration of treatment with steroids and the dose in TB iris.
The duration of treatment as practiced now is about 6 weeks. About 2 weeks is usually the hospital stay, and about 4 weeks is the domiciliary stay. Usual is 6 weeks, but if you get a tuberculoma, you'll re-add. If you've got raised intracranial pressure that's continuing, if you've got an infarct that is continuing to cause edema, you may prolong it, but most of the times it's 6 weeks.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question from Dia Guruvasan is, in children having seizures due to tuberculoma, how do you decide when anti-epileptic drugs can be stopped?
In tuberculoma alone, you should use drugs that are generally used for focal motor seizures. You can use oxcarbazine, you can use phenytoin. These are the drugs that are preferred when you have tuberculoma, which are not necessarily the preferred drugs when you have a tuberculous meningitis.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we have tried to answer almost all questions. It looked like a viva of Dr. Kalra, and you have been very, very crisp with all your answers. We are highly grateful to you for delivering such a wonderful talk. Ranjit, is the winner ready?
Yeah, yes, sir. So, shall we announce the winners, or shall we go to the question?
Sure.
No, please announce the winner.
So, sir, around 220 participants contested the quiz, and 15 questions were there. Like,
Great.
it was quite surprising that the top 3 got all the 15 correct.
Wow, wonderful.
Very good.
It is amazing, incredible, because the questions are tough. So the first prize is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He has not revealed his identity, so we don't know whether he is a trained pediatric neurologist or a PG.
Okay.
The second prize goes to Dr. Darshan Rajatatral. He is from Jipmer. He is a PG.
Very good. Excellent.
He has revealed his phone number, mobile number is there to contact him for prize. The
Great.
third prize goes to Dr. Rachit. He's a PG from UCMS Medical College, Delhi, New Delhi.
Okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
We have other persons. Fourth prize is Hail Hydra. Fifth place LHMC. Sixth place Thor. Seventh place Cornpal. Eighth place Lighthouse. Ninth place Dr. 03. 10. So they are all also in the top 10.
So great. So we can presume that the winner is from Jipmer unless and until 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4 has still not revealed. So I would say Dr. Darshan from Jipmer is the first prize and the runner-up is Dr. Rachit.
Great. Thank you, Ranjit. Thank you for a great...
Ranjit, what were the questions? Can you put them on the screen? I didn't know how to.
Sure,
Yes, now it is,
Thank
Ranjit,
you.
it is time to give answers to all the questions.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the answers are also revealed during the quiz itself, right?
They were revealed, ma'am, but in the interest of everybody, let's discuss.
Also, I think the first prize winner will get an award of gift certificate of ₹500 and the others will get a certificate.
Shall we go through the questions fast, ma'am?
Yeah, quiz.
Most of the answers were there in your talk, ma'am. If they have listened, they would have got it. So rupture of which of these foci are known to disseminate TB into subarachnoid space, leading to tubercular meningitis? The answer is rich focus.
Yeah.
What is the percentage of patients with CNS TB in whom an adult contact could be identified? It is 40 to 70%. Which of the following is not a classic feature of stage 1 of TBM? Vomiting, stagnation of milestones, bulging anterior frontal, neck stiffness. Neck stiffness and meningeal sense is seen in stage 2. Which of the following is the second generation of Gene Expert technology which boosts the sensitivity? The answer is Gene Expert Ultra, which is a newer generation.
Yeah.
Which of the following feature doesn't favor a diagnosis of tuberculoma based on this particular imaging? Conglomerate favors, Fontaine location plus minus, ring enhancement favors. But the expansile nature, the bulging nature, it is so expansile of the entire pons that favors the diagnosis of not being a tuberculoma. It's actually a case of Fontaine glioma. Presence of this finding in the fundus indicates that TBM is most likely associated with. So the PGs has to find out what is this. This is choroid tubercles. Presence of choroid tubercles means it's a miliary tuberculosis or disseminated tuberculosis. Presence of which of these is the reason for this CSF phenomena? We all know this is Coburg coagulum. This is because of the presence of fibrin content in the CSF. What is the recommended maximum duration of ATT in TBM? Madam spoke about this very clearly in her talk. It is 12 months. Which of the following steroid is used in the treatment of TBM? It's either A and C, dexamethasone or prednisolone. The answer is D. Which of the following drugs is responsible for this toxicity? So this toxicity is bullseye maculopathy, basically maculopathy, which is commonly associated with ethambutol. This is a scenario. Some participants found it a little bit difficult to answer this. 6-year-old boy with diagnosis of left parietal tuberculoma was started on ATT with steroids. Within 2 weeks, he returned back with new neurological deficits in the form of right facial palsy and right sixth nerve cranial nerve palsy. His fundus was normal. There were no other features of raised ICP. His repeat imaging revealed increase in the number of tuberculoma with enhancement. Which of the following is the correct statement regarding further management? Basically, if you have a child with a new onset tuberculoma, following 2 weeks of ATT, he developed an iris kind of a. So consider second line ATT? No. Admit the child, consider mannitol 3% NaCl. We don't have any features of raised ICP? No. Admit the child and continue injectable DEXA. It doesn't make any difference because we are already giving oral DEXA. So the answer is continue ATT, continue pulse methylprednisolone or high dose steroids. The option is B. A child presented with fever, seizures, altered sensorium for 10 days. MRI brain was normal. CSF findings showed 120 cells, glucose 34, protein 158, MANTO negative. There was no contact history of COX. Which of the following investigations will not be useful in confirming the diagnosis of TBM? So which of the following is not useful? Adenosine deaminase is useful. Expert is absolutely useful. Zeal-Nielsen staining we are using. Yeah, it's useful. Interferon gamma levels measured by ELISpot is not useful because we can't say it's an active or a latent kind of an infection. Which of the following is the incorrect statement? Isoniazid and pyrazinamide has very good CNS penetration. True. Among children with ischemic strokes and tubercular meningitis, aspirin has shown to reduce the mortality. True. Polymorphism in LTA4-GH gene has shown to predict clinical response to corticosteroids among patients with TBM. True. Among patients with drug-induced ATT-induced liver injury, drugs should be reintroduced one by one in the following order: pyrazinamide, isoniazid, rifampicin. Yeah, that's the answer. It should be introduced in the reverse order. That is rifampicin, isoniazid, and pyrazinamide. So option is option D. Which of the following is an indication of high dose methylprednisolone pulse? So multiple tuberculomas, no. TBM with vasculitis, no. TBM with port spine, no. Opticochiasmatic arachnoiditis is an indication. HIV testing is mandatory in all patients with CNS pulse. True. Yeah, that's the end of
Very good.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Ranjit. It was an excellent show. I think all students enjoyed. Thank you, Dr. Kalra ma'am, for blessing us and giving a wonderful lecture. And hope all the students had a good time. I would request the winner to please send your email ID. Ranjit, do you have the email ID of the first winner?
We have got the mobile number of the winner and the runner-up.
Okay, fine. So we have the first prize only. The others, the first, second, and the third will be issued certificates. But it is, I think, it is to encourage students to read before the topic lecture and listen to the lecture also very carefully. And you can make out that out of 15 questions, ma'am had already 10 questions. Answers were already there in her presentation. So those who had listened would have definitely benefited. So the next talk is on pyogenic meningitis. So please, I would encourage students to please read the topic before the next Friday, and it will be a great event. So thank you once again and wish you all a good night. Thank you, Professor Veena Kalra ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Good night.